Chapter 5 The zone of the magical. He that saith he is in the light, and hateth his brother, is in darkness even until now. He that loveth his brother abideth in the light, and there is none occasion of stumbling in him. But he that hateth his brother is in darkness, and walketh in darkness, and knoweth not whither he goeth, because that darkness hath blinded his eyes. 1 John 2. 9-11, Revised Version. Relativism, which entails the highest tension, is not a path for many. The process of the darkening of the consciousness leads Matt to a point beyond his growth where he gives up the struggle to maintain and defend consciousness. He is then open to the dark force of his nature which take hold and confer upon him a new feeling of plenitude and strength and power. And thus he arrives in the zone of the magical. At the apex of the intellectual hierarchy, relativism leads to consciousness itself falling back into a subservient role, befitting its functional nature. In the lower strata, consciousness, having been taken over ready-made, surrenders itself, and is promptly occupied by preconscious and subconscious forces, which make man their football, appearing now as blindly raging demons and now as beneficent spirits. The despair endured in relativism will, on the lower levels of the hierarchy, be clouded by the flight to intoxication, and thus be projected from the inner onto the outer world. By this means man escapes the torture of coming to terms with himself. But despair advances upon him now from outside, and embodies itself in the very event. In the course of 3 decades, when everything upon which he depends has been imperiled or destroyed, man has learned by experience that he can live without consciousness, that in certain situations, indeed, it is only without consciousness that he can survive. If the man who went to war in 1914 with a song on his lips and flowers on his rifle had been able to see into the coming decades, he would probably have been utterly broken. In great crises, the secrecy of the future appears beneficent. Life fits itself together like a mosaic from separate moments, which contain the fullness of the present and demand the whole of one's strength. It is not always possible to delay over such questions as why things are or what they will be. In times of great crisis, the strong primitive instincts stir and seek to maintain themselves in the individual as they do in whole peoples. The fight for existence is passionate, and the fighter has no time for questioning. It is enough if he gets a square meal and has a roof over his head. Cast into necessitous conditions, he has the urge to save his body, and if possible his soul also. Man lives in the here and now of the instant, recking little of yesterday, which is past, or of the morrow, for which he will need all his powers anew. A good sleep is a better security for the coming day than a sleepless night full of reflections. Thought and consciousness are perversions showing themselves between stimulus and response, which must be instantaneous when the flash of firearms is in question. Here only the vital, animal instincts help one, the feeling for the watching eye and enemy finger on the trigger, and a numb knowledge of the motherly protection of the earth. If the man lacks this vitality of the questing animal, or cannot release immured capacities within him, the present will annihilate him. Consciousness in such situations brings man into danger, and he must throw out the maximum of ballast. Man has learned this by experience often enough in the last 3 decades. Born by the confused urge of life in himself, and supported by the submerged powers of his instinct, man strode between numerous abysses which threatened to engulf him, and by so doing gained a new sensation of strength and power. It is manifest that this could best be done by the human strata, which had remained closest to the primitive level and were not in immediate relationship with consciousness. Many belonging to the intelligent upper stratum have been annihilated because they were incapable of adapting themselves, and periodically varying constellations of power sweep devastatingly through the intelligentsia. For power can maintain itself only if it subjects to itself the intellect. The means of subjugation employed: bribery, social ostracism, imprisonment, torture or murder matters little beside the fact The intellectual stratum has itself experienced a deep modification of consciousness. The deeper layers of the intellect have been rooted up, and drawn into the realm of unconscious being wherein the gods and demons are at home. Some have experienced a late re-encounter with God, a different kind of God, certainly, from the one that used to hang over our fathers' and grandfathers' beds. Others have fallen victim to the gruesomeness of anguish, and lost themselves in the spheres of the demons. The process of contraction to which time, space, and causality were exposed, which led to the darkening of consciousness, was accompanied by an inrush of the unconscious and vital elements in man, depressing the level of consciousness, simplifying it and reducing it to a low and primitive status. Thus he reaches the zone of the preconscious and subconscious, the magical world of nature, peoples and children, of collective bodies and psychopaths, where consciousness changes structurally. 2. The dominant power in the realm of magic is the collective body, suited to its circumstantial world, and it can be understood only from that angle. While Western man lived in consciousness and believed in the myth of the white man, which the rest of the world confirmed, certain qualities appeared to set him apart from the body collective and predestined him to be an individual. They are still at work today. These prerequisites first manifested themselves in Greek thought, which established the type of the conscious individual, and so doing drew a boundary line excluding the continent of Asia, cradle of the human race. The Greek individualist based upon consciousness alone was not able to maintain himself. He set himself against the power of natural creation and that of the body collective, but in the course of a few centuries he succumbed to both. What began in an expansive uprush of freedom, ended in a longing for redemption. Christian belief tore man free from nature's fatalism and from compulsion by the collective body, and restored him to the realm of liberty, but not as a thinking individual based upon consciousness, but as a true believer, an individual based upon his soul's relationship to God. The self-assurance of thought, as it manifested itself in Socrates and provided the foundation for conscious individualism, had proved too weak. But the certainty of inner experience, as manifested in Augustine, desiring to find nothing other than God and the soul, has confirmed the individual through a millennium, and continues to do so where he maintains his pristine faith. It is a mystery why human personality awakened on the frontiers of Asia, and found its completion in a mixture and a separation from the native soils of the old religions, or why, as in a mutation, Western man should constitute a new type of mankind. Greek thought established the function of consciousness, and Christian belief, with its novel existential experience, thus received an instrument for imparting information about itself. Through this linkage came that remarkable abundance of testimonies which is characteristic of Western history. They provide knowledge of individuals unmatched elsewhere quantitatively or qualitatively. Western man, impelled at least to pretend individuality, bears witness to the imperishable inheritance of the West, which the rest of the world has so far been able to assimilate, but not to enrich nor to replace. Christianity placed man as an individual directly in the presence of God, and attested the irreplaceable value of the individual soul, thereby creating a liberty which had not previously existed. It is one of the tragedies of history that only a swiftly vanishing residue of this liberty remains, and it is one of the enthralling uncertainties of our twilight era whether the loss of liberty will be final. Up to the Italian Renaissance, Western man lived within the polarity of the individual soul and God. The modern European holds the view that the individuality which he claims then first appeared, and he cites as evidence the many famous writers, sculptors, painters, explorers, and statesmen of the era. Man can exist as man only by virtue of confirmation from a source beyond himself. Such confirmation must be either religious, when man enters the presence of God and is confirmed by Him, or it is social, when man is confirmed by man and obtains his faith from the collective body. Confirmation from the godly opposite does not confer the security of an autonomous ego on man, lacking to his unfinished nature, but interprets the insecurity as part of his destiny and gives him strength to bear it. By surrendering himself to God, man becomes a function of God's will, so that there is something other echoing through him. It is only as a persona that the individual really exists. When man appears to be self-sufficient and autonomous, it is from social confirmation. The collective body steps into the place of the godly opposite. It has the advantage of being visible and tangible, and its presence is continuous, and it does confer a form of reality, an immediate security and completion. The whole of man's being cannot accept this, however, and the collapse of his existence, bolstered up by the body collective, is at some time inevitable. Nonetheless, the external values upon which such confirmation depends, wealth, power, and the innumerable advantages a man can display, are attractive. The man who can secure them wins approval, and his relationship to the body collective depends upon such qualities as vanity, thirst for fame, desire for power, lust for money, ostentation, and the like, qualities which religion counts sinful, and against which individuals before the Renaissance fought in themselves and others, but which came to full bloom in th. Renaissance, and have since become the activating motives in Europe. The Renaissance figures who serve today as models for the say fabrication of personalities live on confirmation by the collective body alone. Such personalities are not persona, but depend upon the resonance of the crowd. They no longer obtain their confirmation from what is echoing through them, but they are confirmed by the echo which is reflected back upon them from the collective body. They are not individuals, but collective beings. Modern history turns them into titans, and under the concept of genius stamps them with divinity. The collective body thus honors and confirms itself in their persons. For however impressive their performances in Renaissance times, they have become great as functionaries of the collective body, so that an upstart adventurer from Corsica, who left nothing of any value behind him, has been fated as a genius, like equally upstart successor who recently steered a nation to shipwreck. The Italian Renaissance extinguished the polarity between man and God, which was the basis of Western individuality. When the collective body took the place of God, the area of liberty began to dwindle away. To understand the present situation, it is important to get the historical correlation clear. Modern man has for some time been puzzled by the dominance of the body collective and the loss of his liberty, and notes with dismay that he is being overrun by the masses without being able to explain the sudden advent of the procedure. In fact, it is not happening at all suddenly, but represents only the last stage of an historical process which began with the Italian Renaissance, and is being rapidly pushed by the crisis to its end. But what was unconscious at the Renaissance has become conscious reality, whereas then the whole light of consciousness fell upon the individual, who stood in the foreground, while the collective body, which alone made the play acting possible, was blurred. Now the background has moved into the spotlight, and the individual has become of no importance, since everyone can now see the wires he hangs on and by which he is worked. When the master appears, the servant becomes insignificant. Western man has passed once more under the compulsive dominance of the collective body, from which Christianity freed him when it placed him as an individual before God. His position differs little, except in its complications, from that of men at the end of the ancient world. The same phenomena are reproducing themselves, with deceptive variations. The greater area slows down the whole world process, while nations display a sprightlier tempo at the beginning of their dissolution. Within the national boundaries, the Czars follow one another, but the whole world has not yet found its. Augustus, being still in the period of civil war, Christianity also released man from the fatalism of a nature in which great Pan had died and rigid necessity was all over the expiring world of antiquity, with its dead gods. The Asiatic mother while poured the cornucopia of her cults, stifling the last remnants of liberty. The primum mobile, founded by the rationalistic monotheism of the Greeks, had gone, but the planets remained, to receive from Babylonish astronomy a sinister glitter in which men shrank into puppets. When the Italian Renaissance removed the polarity between the individual and God, men also fell again into the fatalism of nature. Once more the picture of the personified primum mobile, this time that of the living God, faded out. Once more the planets shone with sinister brilliance and took control of human destinies. Sponsored by the Arabs, star divination in the 13th century began its triumphal progress through the West. It attained its peak in the 15th and 16th centuries, but stretched on into the 18th. It was not Christianity which this time liberated man from cosmic mechanism. Mathematics gave him insight into the working of the mechanism, and enabled him to adapt more of its power to his own will. This act created faith in the power of human consciousness, upon which man based the autonomy of his existence. But the liberty it conferred was not quite that indivisible liberty of his nature, which Christianity had brought. It was limited to consciousness alone. Only as a thinking being could man surmount cosmic necessity and maintain his autonomy as liberty of thought and liberty of spirit. Liberty of thought and spirit are concepts which make the modern European's heart beat faster. In the actual world of nature, the liberty peculiar to consciousness alone did not exist. To realize it, man had to build a world of his own. The realm of man demanded by Francis Bacon, where he enjoyed unrestricted mastery and complete liberty. This realm, independent of nature and subject only to the laws which man himself ordained, was the goal of the West. It has been very nearly attained in modern technical civilization, and it is bringing man under a compulsion such as recalls the inception of his history. Mechanism and collectivism, growing into a demonic unity which has become a totality, have been the instruments of this destiny. The gigantic apparatus of our technical world civilization, modeled on the mechanism of the universe as perceived by consciousness. The apparatus makes man independent of nature, compulsion, and grants him a freedom unknown before. Apparatus could not recognize nature and the universe in living totality, however, but could only accept and use them as the model for mechanism and materialism. So it could not take man over in his totality, but only as a conscious, thinking, reasonable being. It was forced to abstract his corporeal and spiritual elements. The materialized and mechanized apparatus was demanding rationalized and intellectualized man. The independence man has gained from nature in his artifices world guarantees him considerable liberty. And as a conscious being contemplating, correcting, and improving his artificial world, his liberty is potent. But he is not free as man, a total being. For the apparatus cannot use him as a total being, and he has to adapt himself to it. And if he is unable to discount the totality of his being, he experiences the grisly compulsion of the machine. He becomes a cog in the wheels, and feels a desperate lack of freedom. Mechanism surrounds him, as it were, with a shell, and is reinforced by collectivism, which constitutes the inside of the shell. The apparatus of technical civilization depends upon the precise, regulated effort of the collective body, which has brought the rational allocation of labor to high efficiency. But collectivism has not only developed through the processes of technical civilization, but was inherent in it from the start. Natural science, which founded the modern world, was dependent upon two possibilities: discovery and the mathematical method, removable by negation. Science was therefore enveloped in materialism and mechanism. Discovery, which is creatively individual, was biased towards materialism and the machine, and tended to project its a priori convictions onto phenomena. While discovery remains the province of the individual, however, the mathematical method makes precise thought by the collective body possible, because it ignores qualities and deals only with the number is a different abstraction from the word, which can never be a sign in the same way, but always allows vital polarity between the subjective and the objective to show, thus constituting a comparison and a synthesis of them. The more the word becomes a sign only, the more debilitated it is, or, to put it another way, the richer its symbolic content, the poorer is its actual content. The word cannot be separated from its bearer, nor released from the polarity between subject and object. It is mediatory, but does not transmit the same image from speaker to hearer. The clarity and force of the word are greatest when it is spoken out of the depths of existence, that is to say, not from the consciousness, but from the conscience. It is therefore bound up with the individual, who receives it in the depths of his being, in abstracted meditation. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Rationalism has always fought shy of this fact, and from Plato onwards has escaped by limiting itself to numbers. For Plato, clarity exists in mathematics alone. Galileo said that the book of nature had been written in mathematical terms and its characters consisted of triangles, crosses, and other geometrical figures. It was for that reason that Descartes demanded mathesis universalis upon which to base the autonomy of consciousness. He even dreamed of a lingua universalis in which the word should possess the same abstract positiveness of number, and hoped to attain the goal of philosophy by analyzing the contents of consciousness down to their last elements, that is to say, by disintegrating speech into atoms. As natural science had the world, the word is always something concrete. The word is flesh, while number is an atom, a small building component, which can be adapted to fit innumerable forms and formulae. The word is therefore always bound up with the individual, and its essential content will be determined by the depth from which the individual speaks and the individuality of the hearer, that is to say, the depth to which it is able to penetrate. The truth of the word can therefore never be elaborated and heightened by the collective body, but only by the individual, who, to understand it, has to reach the existential depth out of which the word was spoken. Hence the catastrophic devaluation of the word today is identical with the devaluation of the individual. And whereas the development of the word is limited, number is capable of a development which removes it ever farther from the world of tangible and visible forms whence it originates, and into the world of intellectual principles where it becomes autonomous and absolute, thus providing a basis for the autonomy of consciousness. The concept of number in its logical autonomous form becomes an immediate outcome of pure thought laws. It is referred to logical constants which are independent of any opinions and need have nothing concrete corresponding to them. Truth communicate in numbers and self-demonstrated is as independent of its bearer as it is of an opposite, as independent of subject as it is of object. It can be applied to everything susceptible of numeration and mensuration, and needs neither interpretation nor clarification. Number constitutes a lingua universalis capable of being elaborate collectively and made an instrument of communal thought. Without this collective thinking, the apparatus of technical civilization would never have been attained. And within the network of numbers there is a logic which seems as it were to emerge out of the next stages of development. Men who employ the mathematical method only need follow the inner logic of the system to be driven of themselves. They can speed up a course of development if they join the collective body and share in the work. In the last war, atomic fission was speeded up by 50 years or so. In mathematics, then, man found not only the means to subject nature and the universe to his consciousness, but also language. Such precision as to make communal elaboration possible, the collective consciousness making use of the energies liberated by the common work of numbers of men after division of labor. The bodily and spiritual elements of the human being, however, not being mensurable or enumerable, were eschewed by mathematics and the technical apparatus, just as the imponderables of the universe at large were ignored. As a conscious being, man was given the external values which the technical apparatus could bestow, and in time was able to base his existence upon the body collective alone. Thus collectivism and technical civilization grow together, condition each other, and display themselves more and more openly, and the individual falls under their double compulsion, experiencing liberty only through the power afforded by the apparatus over nature, or the collective body. Power thus becomes the sole attribute. Freedom. 100 examples of that are given every day. Mechanism compels us to take the 7:17 train each day. In consciousness we stand above the fact, but as body and soul beings we thrust ourselves into the collective urge towards the railroad, there. Seeing two men who perceive their freedom in that part of the apparatus over which they have power, the chief guard perceives it as he drives the collective body into the carriage, bellows out his orders, and finally sets the whole affair in motion with a wave of his hand. The engine driver sees it when, with a slight pressure on the lever, he races the crowded train forward at a speed which cocks say snook at the laws of nature. Guard and engine driver are just such poor devils, creatures overpowered body and soul as are we ourselves. While everything goes faster and faster, the individual life gets more and more pitiful. 3. The man of magic becomes obsessed by his world upon which he is utterly dependent and to which he is thoroughly adapted. If he escapes from his circumstantial world, he runs aground on the alien and unknown. What distinguishes him from the beast is his disruption of the natural unity of inner world, body and outer world, to which the animal is adapted. Winning possession of the world of nature around him, he created himself a world of his own, which might be termed pre-cultural, where he lived in an inner world which might be termed pre-conscious. He was closely adapted to his circumstantial world, which enclosed him like a shell, within which there were strict laws and no liberty. Beyond it lay the world of humanity's aboriginal anguish, from which man had screened himself. There was for him no possibility of life beyond the shell. He existed as a member of the tribe or race, and not as an individual. The collective body is formed not only of living members, but also of their ancestors long dead. It constitutes a single body, none of its separate members being able to say I, but living only through the joint we. It is thus that we first encounter primitive man, the man of magic on the first step of human development. There he stands, unfinished, imperfect, a weakly being ill adapted to maintaining his life, but the fact that he can do so amid a creation grown alien to him constitutes his liberty. It is a very restricted liberty. Maintaining himself solely as member of the body collective, he knows nothing of it, cannot be said to possess it. Many millennia of effort and sacrifice were needed before man could release himself from the zone of the magical, liberate himself from the body collective and his narrow circumstantial world, and establish himself as an individual. It has needed few centuries to sling man back again into the zone of the magical, the process being accelerated in the last 3 decades. Within the artificial world of technical civilization, man is superior to all earthly creatures. He can rise higher and more swiftly than any bird, dive deeper than any fish, conquer space where no other creature could live. He has powers which earlier man would attribute to God. This artificial technical world has been elaborated and brought to astonishing perfection in the course of a few decades. It has embraced wider and wider areas of the earth, until today the world is practically a man-made universe, where he can propose and dispose as he pleases. Technical civilization now confers upon him everything of which he stands in need: power, protection, help, surety, and security of every kind. Nobody is shut out from this artificial world. Over the whole surface of the globe there is no space which has not been incorporated in the world of technical civilization. And if there were, the man who left civilization would be lost, for civilization has deprived him of faculties upon which primitive man depended. Modern civilized man has no chance of living without its technical aids. Thus paradoxically man has escaped from dependence upon nature to dependence upon the artificial world of his own creation, and finds himself under the same kind of compulsion as primitive man. Until a few decades ago man scarcely perceived this state of dependence. He was comfortable in his new world, enjoyed the power it gave, and accepted it as liberty. His vision circled round the perfecting of his world, and there are still those who manage to believe in that goal. Their ideal is the big modern city, with its lights and window displays, its swift tempo and its restless rhythm. To enlarge the fairy tale town into a fairy tale world, where all man's wishes would be fulfilled, is their dream of the future. The crisis made man conscious of his dependence on his artificial world. It brought the reverse side of it into view. In 3 decades, the ideal of the big city has been reversed. Men dream of a modest house in the country, with a large garden and a few trees, and liberty, lots of liberty. Or they dream of a desert island far from civilization with all its horrors. The crisis has made man conscious of where he has gone. He no longer feels at home in his world, but suddenly perceives that he has absolutely no hope of escaping from this world. Totality and total are the words of power arising from this experience, and they keep appearing in different guises. Totality means the inseparable unity of the animal with its environment. It is found in the close organization of the beehive or the ant heap, objects of close observation by man today. Total applies equally to primitives, whose closed world is composed of 1,000 interplated strands, for which reason primitives are taking an ever greater place in scientific thought today. The renewed groping into their nature has arisen from experience of the new totalitarianism of civilization. Within technical civilization each man has his task to perform so that the gigantic apparatus can function without friction. And his total dependence is increased by the necessary specialization and division of labor. The apparatus can only use men as conscious beings, and drives them towards limiting their existence to consciousness. The unconscious vital and emotional elements of human beings are a hindrance to specialization. To adapt himself to the apparatus, man must renounce certain elements of his being which would imperil its working. He has to go through a stage of preparation. This is similar to the initiation rites of primitive peoples, often long and often painful, which a man must undergo before being given his place in the tribe. Personality is not to be built up within the apparatus, which imprints a special character in accordance with its own will. Independence of character would be like sand in the wheels. The wheels are so interrelated and ground to fit that they need oil, that is to say men who are soft and pliant, ductile and obedient, who embody an agreed average which has to be worked out and adjusted, and are well specialized. If the measure of mankind is the average output performance, then the individual as an individual is of no importance. Nobody is indispensable. In his function the individual becomes a general term, not his own self. Predestined for this life are men who have no desire to be themselves, they take the precedence. It seems as if the world has to get into the hands of mediocrity, of men without a destiny, without a rank and without a humanity of their own. Karl Jaspers, The Intellectual Situation of Our Time. The bigger the apparatus becomes and the more totally it is established, the smaller must be the man whom it protects, for the apparatus can increase in size only through the work of the collective body, i.e., through a distribution of labor, which makes it inevitable for the individual man to give up ever wider areas of his being. The artificial world swells forth gigantically, and not only does it embrace the earth ever more totally, but it also draws individual man ever more completely into itself, with no hope of escape. To maintain the apparatus and ensure his own existence within it, the individual has to specialize more and more, differentiate himself, incorporate himself. That is to say, he has to allow ever wider areas of his nature to be lopped off, leveled down, or stunted. Hence the tiny stratum of those capable of supervising this gigantic apparatus must dwindle. Proper supervision would require an independent and universal attitude, but power and position, influence and directive authority are to be found only within the apparatus, and it demands a specialization which is death to any independence, any universality. Hence the mechanism keeps growing by its own power of inertia, attaining an existence of its own compared with which man's existence seems unimportant, while its direction grows more and more problematical. Man, no longer in possession of his circumstantial world, is becoming obsessed by it like primitive man, and a prerequisite of the magical zone has been provided. The primitive only functions as member of a collective aggregation, which in its totality must be termed individual. This second prerequisite is contained in the first, and has also become reality to modern man. The apparatus, only able to employ the normalize, incorporated and interchangeable average man if it is to function without friction, uses every means to grind man to the desired pattern, flattens out all particularities, and makes of men a closed and uniform collective body, which in its turn carries farther the process of incorporating the individual. Hence the apparatus only constitutes the instrument with which the body collective, promoted by the Italian Renaissance to be the supreme court of appeal to humanity in the West, creates itself, means to realize itself. Christianity gave reality to the individual, placed before God, and individual personalities abounded as long as the Christian God was recognized as supreme. The collective body, as the supreme court, can only give reality to itself, and reveals its nature in the masses enclosed by the shell of the apparatus. The masses and the apparatus belong together. The big machinery is needed to give the masses life. It must be disposed towards mass qualities, in its working, towards masses of workers, in production, towards evaluation of masses of consumers. Masses there have always been, of but transitional reality, in the form of loose heaps of unorganized humanity, who coalesce to unity in their affectivity. Masses in the form of a public have at various times been a typical product of history. The indefinite delimitation and stratification of people mentally akin, through listening to and accepting the same words and views. But masses as the whole body of men so incorporated in an all-embracive apparatus that the will and qualities of the majority have to be decisive, is the continuously demonstrated power in our world today, which assumes a merely transitional form in the public and the masses regarded simply as heaps of humanity. Karl Jaspers, The Intellectual Situation of Our Time. The apparatus arises from the collective body's will to present itself as such, and it becomes the collective body's instrument for revealing itself ever more clearly and realizing itself ever more totally. Apparatus and collective body are not to be distinguished. The former is the outside and the latter the inside of one gigantic body, humanity, into which Western man has coalesced to conquer the world, and into which the whole of mankind will be incorporated in the course of a couple of centuries, to thrust forth into the outer universe. For this living giant, containing 3 milliards of human beings and provided with cosmic energies of Immeasurable force, is more than the planet can contain. The collective forces which it has released and goes on releasing, and the cosmic energies which it has put into the service of the apparatus, and is every day increasing, will either thrust forth to conquer further space or they will blow the planet to bits, under the double compulsion of the mechanism of his artificial world, and of the collective body. Man has slithered back to his historical beginnings, and passed into the zone of the magical. 4. Up to the outbreak of the crisis, man felt a sense of comparative well-being under the domination of apparatus and body collective, and lived so securely, and was so sure of himself within the narrow sphere of his consciousness, that he failed to notice his retrogression to the world of the magical, that was suddenly changed at the outbreak of the crisis, which brought an eruption of dark alien forces, shattering to his consciousness. Because they could not be classified in its categories, the machinery of his technical civilization lost its precision and its soothing frictionless rhythm, and tore away the props on which his consciousness was based. He then perceived that the self-certainty of thought did not exist, but confidence in rationalism was due to the achievement of technical civilization. Suddenly the whole world seemed changed. The apparatus went in fits and starts. Money vanished into thin air, and hoarded security was lost. Profession and work, chief bulwarks of modern security, collapsed. What was the unemployed man to do? In a total world there is no free space. Anyone losing his place is lost, outlawed, and excommunicated, just like a primitive who had been cast out of his tribe. And why should a man who had worked willingly all his life be suddenly thrust onto the street and forced to accept the state's beggarly charity? But that is not all. Food becomes scanty, clothes wear out, and there are no substitutes. Dwellings rock and are brought to ruins. Even the home is threatened. Man wanders in the void, and death reaps a rich harvest. Home, family, profession, and property. Technical civilization, these were the great securities of an existent, sure of its ends, and with no longing for God. Man's fall from security is appalling. The blow is more devastating than any natural catastrophe was to bygone ages. Then, he could but accept the event and rely on harmony re-establishing itself in nature. In technical civilization man can rely on nothing but the power of his consciousness. And it is his faith in his consciousness and all-sufficient power which the crisis strikes down. 1. Security vanishes from the encompassing world, and with it any inner certainty. Consciousness descends into the world of magic. It is more confusing world. The world of consciousness falls naturally into subject and object, standing sharply defined one against the other. Man possesses clear picture of the world, and of himself. I and world were fixed magnitudes of his conscious state. The fact of their conditioning each other, of the security of culture, and the certainty consciousness being mutually correspondent, were matters of which he was unaware, because he lived naturally in his world. The world of the magical does not possess this clarity. In it the subject and the object, I and the world, do not stand out sharply distinguished, but melt into each other, so that it is impossible to disentangle the subjective and objective elements in an experience. Modern civilized man has difficulty in thinking his way into world, yet he can reach it at a stride. He has only to lose his way on an excursion in a dense forest. The night overtakes him, and the transition from the last of daylight, through the twilight when things become diffuse and liquid, to complete darkness, makes his nerves tense and works him into an unusual state of excitement. And now, the noises of an alien world break over him, such as his consciousness cannot define and fit into his scheme of things. The bellowing cry of a wild beast, the scream of a screech owl, the cooing laughter of a wild dove, the rustling and crackling in the undergrowth, the heavy swishing of the treetops, and the ghostly wing beat of a bat. From Every quarter something presses in upon the city man, it of whose significance he knows nothing, whether it threatens and imperils him or is indifferent to him. Consciousness gives up. It has none of the experimental knowledge of the forester, who can refer these noises back to their causes. He only hears a shriek, a bellowing cry, a soft laughing coo, a heavy movement above him, and perceives the slipstream of some being fluttering past his head. His imagination is filled with horrors which the bright day and illuminated night of the big city had banished. A juniper bush suddenly stands before him, as big as a man and with a face of its own. A root twists in a bizarre shape before his feet, like a wooden snake. A tree holds out its branches like open arms, and the earth on which he treads answers heavily and hollowly. One little step off the pathways of the bright world, a landmark missed, an unknown road, only some trifle, and we find ourselves in the world of magic again. Even speech offers no absolute security. Unlike number, the word has never lost its magical past. If we rise over the flat surface of speech in thinking, in speaking, or in writing, we are like a man riding over the Bodensee Lake. We need only pause over a word and question its meaning, and the thin ice breaks, and we fall into the uncertainty of the magical. Man's consciousness is not secure and solid, but is thinly partitioned from a dark realm within us and around us, from which elemental forces may break into the narrow guarded area of our ego and of our conscious circumstantial world and flood it out. Imagine yourself in the first-class dining saloon of a large ocean liner. Self-conscious, well-dressed people move about with staggering naturalness. Their security rests on experience and belief. Experience tells them that thousands of such voyages have been made without danger, and they believe that this trip will turn out like the others. Thus the passengers are shut off from depth and amplitude in their experience of the sea, feeling none of the tension, the demand for mental alertness which man once brought to an ocean crossing. These forces are laying waste, and must be expended in some other way. Thus the vast and violent background of the sea becomes no more than a bit of scenery against which human beings flirt and play and dance, eat and drink well, and display each his or her own dolled-up ego, anxiously listening for applause, approval, confirmation, clarity, security, and consciousness on the one side, emptiness, poverty and metaphysical boredom on the other. Such are the advantages and the disadvantages of ridding ourselves of our burdens by means of consciousness. For the rest, the security of the ocean liner is deceptive. The passengers know nothing of the burdens of those who carry the responsibility for the ship. Every malady, theft, danger indeed, anything which might impair the passenger's sense of security is hidden away. But suppose the liner runs into an iceberg or onto a mine left over from the World War. At a single blow the passengers' circumstantial world is altered and the security of their egos destroyed. The bizarre and demonic specter of the magical will emerge from these lords of creation, and despite tailcoats, pearl necklaces, dance music, and attentive stewards, there will suddenly appear creature millennially accustomed to suffering and wretchedness. Man, that thing ugliest yet nearest to God in all creation, who bellow his anguish and desperation up to heaven, and grabs at expedient at which he would have laughed while drinking his last cocktail. We are not clear of the world of magic, a false step, a trivial stumble, and back we are in the midst of it. When modern man sinks back into the sphere of the magical, subject and object become charged again, and regain their dangerous and incalculable force. The unity of subject and object arises from mental attitude completely different from that of conscious man. Man living in the collective we becomes one with the thing, for in the world of magic there is nothing dead and soulless, everything is bedded in a mystical force which fills and dominates the who world. The mentality of primitives allows them to think and feel at the same time that all beings are similar, that is, that they all partake of the same substance and the same sum total of qualities, it seems by no means important to separate things into different classes, genera, and kinds in accordance with an hierarchy of concepts logically determined by their extensions in time and in space. It tries first and foremost to establish whether the objects which evoke and hold its attention contain the mana or imunu, and to what extent, and whether this mysterious fluidum is well disposed or hostile. The primitive sees as we do the great difference between a stone and a tree, or between a fish and a bird. But he does not stop there, and does not perceive it in the same way as we do. The form of the being only interests him so far as it permits him to conjecture what amount of mana or imunu it contains. He therefore sees nothing unusual in metamorphosis which would seem to us quite unbelievable, for in his view things can change their forms in an instant. They are all vessels of mysterious forces, and an apparently insignificant looking being may contain it to a frightful degree. Despite their apparently endless diversity, things are thus basically similar. The primitive feels no need to investigate them or try to learn about their natures. He is sure of their similarity. Levi-Brohl, the thought of nature peoples. Soul and thing form a unity, held together by the same mystical power which floods the world and is to be found in all beings and all objects. One can speak of a mystical participation of the soul in its object, participation mystique, or one can say the soul is obsessed by its object, it communicates with it, has total experience of it in a symbiosis. Things frequently contain a significance which does not lie in their mere appearance. They are at the same time subjectivized, filled with soul, filled with spirit, and filled with spirits. Th. W. Dunsell, The Man of Magic. It is the world of primitives, nature peoples, and children, of sagas, fairy tales, and ghosts, where all things are inspired with life and soul and everything is interchangeable. It is the world of dreams, where things lose their forms and melt into one another. Also, of course, it is the world of lunatics and psychopaths. Space and time and causality in the world of the magical are of utterly different shape from their phenomenal form in the world of consciousness. If natural savages do not think of seeking out causal connections, if they consider these unimportant, it is the natural consequence of the enduring fact that in their collective imaginations, thought is vigilant for the intervention of secret forces. Hence the causal connections which are for us the skeleton structure, the basis of their reality, and mean stability, have very little interest for them. Bentley relates that Whitehead saw one of his workers sitting on a rainy day directly in the cold wind. He told the man to go home and put something on. But the man countered him, "One does not die from a cold wind. That means nothing. One only gets sick or dies if one has been bewitched." Levi-Brohl. The primitive mentality busies itself, as ours does, with the causes of events. But it does not look in the same direction for them. It lives in a world wherein innumerable occult forces are everywhere present and constantly active or ready to act. Knowledge of nature's laws suffices for us. The attitude of primitive man is quite different. He may have noted the consistent precursors of the event interesting him, and in action he takes these observations most carefully into account. But he will always look for the real causes in the world of unknown powers, on the far side of what we call nature, in metaphysics in the literal sense of the word. Levi-Brohl. This is the world into which modern man falls when the destroys the props of consciousness.